What if your family name was celebrated across Hollywood, but your legacy ended in blood? What if the house that once echoed with laughter, scripts, and movie premieres became a double murder crime scene? What if your brother, your own flesh and blood, was dragged out of a guest house in handcuffs, screaming he was innocent, just hours after your parents were stabbed to death? And what if, just days ago, that same brother was found brutally beaten to death in prison? His face unrecognizable, his death ruled suspicious, and your family still shrouded in silence. Because that's exactly what has just happened. Jake and Romy Reiner, children of legendary director Rob Reiner and philanthropist Michelle Singer Reiner, have just confirmed the darkest update yet. Nick Reiner is dead. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. And the whispers inside the prison? They say it wasn't just an inmate brawl. They say he was silenced. But why? And more importantly, what did Nick know that someone didn't want getting out? This is the story of how one of Hollywood's most respected families spiraled into unimaginable tragedy. A story of fame, betrayal, secrets, and the quiet dangers that often lurk behind mansion walls. Because everything looked perfect until that December night. And by the time the truth started unraveling, it was already too late. Let's go back. Let's rewind to the night of December 14th. The night Romy Reiner walked into her childhood home and found her parents lying lifeless in a pool of blood. The mansion that hid a nightmare. Brentwood. The word itself evokes images of affluence, elite privacy, and Hollywood royalty. Lush hedges line the winding streets, and hidden security cameras flicker like quiet sentries above wrought iron gates. It was here, on a cul-de-sac worth more than some entire towns, that the Reiner family planted their roots. Rob Reiner, at 78, wasn't just a filmmaker. He was Hollywood history. From Stand By Me to When Harry Met Sally, he shaped a generation of cinema. His wife, Michelle Singer Reiner, 70, was the quieter half, an advocate, a devoted mother, and a tireless champion for social justice. They were, by all accounts, a power couple. And their children? Jake, Romy, and Nick. Romy, 27, was a rising actress with a sharp wit and an even sharper sense of self-awareness. Jake, 30s, more private. And Nick, 32, the enigma. A screenwriter who had danced with fame and addiction in equal measure. He was brilliant, some said. Troubled, others whispered. Haunted, his sister allegedly once told a friend. And on December 14th, that haunting became real. That night, the Brentwood mansion looked peaceful from the outside. The lights were dimmed, the fountain trickled softly in the front yard, and the Tesla sat untouched in the driveway. But inside was carnage. Rob and Michelle were found stabbed multiple times. The coroner would later classify the cause of death as multiple sharp force injuries, and the manner as homicide. No signs of forced entry, no struggle, at least not from the outside. But the oddest detail? Nick lived on the property, in the guest house, a mere stone's throw from the main residence. He was arrested that very night. 2 counts of first-degree murder. No bail, no comment, no tears. At least, not then. A family fractured. What had happened to this family? Just months earlier, they'd posed together for a gala. Smiles, tuxedos, and charm. But some who knew the Reiners say things had already begun to unravel long before the first knife wound. There were rumors of arguments. Late-night shouting matches between Rob and Nick. A possible falling out over money. Some say Rob was ready to cut Nick off financially. Others insist Nick had threatened to expose family secrets. Whatever the truth, something cracked that winter. And it wouldn't take long for the media storm to hit. The world reacts. How could this happen? When news broke, it wasn't just a headline. It was a cultural rupture. Director Rob Reiner and wife found dead in Brentwood mansion. Paparazzi descended. Commentators speculated. Twitter exploded. Jake and Romy were silent. For days. Then weeks. The only thing that emerged was Romy's frantic 911 call, leaked to the press just days after the murders. Her voice trembling, barely audible. He's still here. Oh my God. I think it was Nick. He's been acting strange. But what exactly did she mean by strange? Was it drugs? Paranoia? Or was it something deeper? Something that had been building for years? Nick's arrest. What the cameras didn't show. That night, police body cams captured the arrest. Nick was sitting on the edge of his bed, shirtless, staring into space. When officers entered the guest house, he didn't flinch. "Nick Reiner," an officer said firmly. "You're under arrest for the murder of Rob and Michelle Reiner." Still, no reaction. But one detail in the police report stands out. Nick allegedly turned to the arresting officer and said, "They wanted this. You'll see." Cryptic, defiant, maybe even delusional. Or was it a final clue? Because what came next would only raise more questions. The silence from Jake and Romy breaks. For weeks, the remaining siblings stayed quiet. Jake reportedly hired a private investigator. Romy retreated from social media. But then, just days ago, a joint statement was released. "We are devastated by the passing of our brother Nick. While our family has suffered an unfathomable loss, we ask for privacy as we continue to seek the full truth behind what happened." Both then and now. It was the first time they acknowledged Nick's death in prison, and it sent shockwaves across every major network. Because the official report? Blunt force trauma sustained during an altercation with fellow inmates. But insiders say the details are far more disturbing. Nick didn't die in a fight. He was beaten beyond recognition. And reportedly, his last words, before slipping into unconsciousness, were, "You have no idea who you're protecting." A dangerous legacy. Was Nick mentally ill? Was he guilty? Or was he framed? As outrageous as that sounds, some are now asking that very question. Why? Because inconsistencies are starting to emerge. Gaps in the timeline, missing surveillance footage, anomalies in the autopsy. And Romy? Sources close to the family say she's begun to question the official narrative too. Privately, she's reportedly told friends, "There's more to this. Nick wasn't the only one capable of murder." That line alone has set the internet ablaze. Was she referring to another family member? A close associate? Someone with a motive that's been buried beneath layers of Hollywood sheen? Or was it simply the grief speaking? Either way, the Reiner legacy is no longer one of cinema and charm. It's a legacy written in tragedy. And tonight, that legacy gets darker. Because what you're about to hear hasn't been told anywhere else. From unreleased diary entries, to security footage that mysteriously disappeared, to a prison leak that may prove Nick wasn't acting alone, this story is far from over. In fact, it's just beginning. Because someone wanted Nick Reiner silenced. But they forgot one thing. Jake and Romy aren't done asking questions. And neither are we. What really happened on the night Rob and Michelle Reiner were killed? Was it a calculated act of rage? A crime of passion? Or was something else going on entirely? December 14th, 2025. Brentwood. A quiet Sunday evening. At least, that's what it looked like from the outside. Behind those luxury walls and manicured hedges, something terrifying was unfolding. The world would soon know the date as the moment one of Hollywood's most beloved families shattered. But before the headlines and handcuffs, before the death toll and the public statements, there was just a house. And inside it, a ticking time bomb. He's still here. The 911 call came in at 10:42 p.m. The voice was frantic. Breathless. Almost whispering. "Please. I need help. I think he's still here." That voice belonged to Romy Reiner. And those 7 words? They would set off a media firestorm. But let's rewind just a few hours. Because to truly understand what went wrong, we have to retrace every single step of that evening. A normal day, or so it seemed. According to housekeeper Marta G., the day began like any other. Rob Reiner had his usual late breakfast. Coffee with oat milk, a New York Times folded across the granite kitchen counter. Michelle took a morning walk around the garden. Nick didn't leave his guest house. He'd been in a weird place lately, Marta told investigators. Locked up in that room. Always scribbling in that notebook. Didn't want to be bothered. And that's when things started to feel off. At 3:13 p.m., a neighbor reported hearing shouting from the direction of the Reiner property. At 3:27 p.m., the Ring camera on a nearby home captured Romy's car pulling up. She was supposed to drop off something for her mother. A new set of earrings, reportedly. But no one came to the door. Odd, but not impossible. Maybe they were in the back. Maybe they were napping. Romy let herself in using the family code. That code would become a crucial piece of evidence later. Inside, the house was quiet, but not peaceful. The clues in the silence. Have you ever walked into a room and felt something was wrong before you saw it? That was what Romy described to police. I didn't smell blood, she said. I smelled stillness. Like the air wasn't moving. Like the house was waiting. Creepy, right? She moved slowly, calling out to her parents. No response. She walked toward the sitting room and froze. Blood. On the carpet. Not a splash. Not a smear. A pool. And then, her mother. Michelle was lying near the fireplace. Her eyes open. Her body twisted unnaturally. Stab wounds visible even through her blouse. Romy screamed. But the worst was yet to come. She found Rob seconds later. Slumped over in his study. Face down. A pen still in his hand. Blood soaked the papers beneath him. Romy didn't check for a pulse. She didn't have to. She ran. Outside. Down the steps. Onto the lawn. And that's when she looked toward the guest house. A single light was on. Her voice cracked as she told the 911 dispatcher. He's still here. I think it was Nick. The guest house of secrets. When police arrived, they surrounded the entire property. Guns drawn. Flashlights sweeping the hedges. Dogs barking in the distance. The guest house door was unlocked. Inside, they found Nick Reiner sitting on a couch. Shirtless. Calm. A notebook rested on the table. A single line scrawled across the open page. They were never going to let me be free. He didn't resist arrest. He didn't ask questions. When they told him he was being detained for the murder of his parents, he simply said, I'm not the one you should be afraid of. What do you make of that? Let's pause. That's not something a guilty man says. Or is it? Could it be delusion? Manipulation? Or was he trying to tell us something? The Reiner family had always kept things private. Even when Nick struggled with addiction in his 20s, they downplayed it publicly. But behind closed doors? Sources say Rob and Nick's relationship had deteriorated to the point of no return. Some say Rob had threatened to kick Nick out of the guest house. Others claim Michelle had warned Nick that he was destroying the family. Was December 14th the breaking point? Or was it the perfect setup? Forensics tell a story, but not a complete one. The autopsy reports came back fast. Both Rob and Michelle had been stabbed repeatedly. Rob, 7 times. Michelle, 11. No defensive wounds. That raised questions. Were they ambushed? Or did they know their killer? And then came the weird part. There were traces of Nick's DNA in the house. That wasn't shocking. He lived there. But on the knife? None. Not a drop of Nick's blood or fingerprints. Instead, the weapon was wiped clean. No usable prints at all. How does a man commit such a brutal crime without leaving any trace? Was he careful? Or was he being framed? The house had eyes, but they were closed. Here's where things take a darker turn. The Reiners had a security system. One of the best. Motion sensors. Indoor cams. Exterior floodlights. All backed up to a private cloud. But guess what? Between 2:42 p.m. and 4:11 p.m. on December 14th, the system went dark. Just that one window. After that, everything resumed as normal. Coincidence? Or did someone know exactly how to disable it, and when? Investigators would later admit there was a breach. Intentional. Professional. Which begs the question, was Nick that clever? Or did someone else kill Rob and Michelle while Nick sat isolated in the guest house? The other timeline. There's one more wrinkle. One that didn't make headlines at first. Around 2:50 p.m., a black SUV was seen driving into the Reiner estate's private side entrance. It wasn't one of the family's cars. The plates were partially obscured. It was only visible for 3 seconds on the neighbor's Ring camera. No one mentioned it. Not publicly. Not in the arrest report. Until now. Because Romy later told investigators something chilling. I saw that car too. It was gone when I came out. Let that sink in. Someone may have entered the property. Someone other than Nick. And left without a trace. What was Nick doing during the murders? In police interrogation, Nick was hazy. He claimed he was watching movies in his guest house. Alone. No witnesses. No phone logs. Just silence. He didn't deny anything directly. But he kept repeating one line. They were already dead when I got there. Got where? The house. Or the situation. Was it guilt? Denial? Or something deeper? He also said something else, something bizarre. Check the camera logs. You'll see I'm not lying. But the cameras were disabled. So how did he know? Jake Reiner arrives, and everything changes. Hours after the arrest, Jake Reiner landed in LA. He had flown in from New York, unaware of the unfolding nightmare. According to police logs, he arrived at the estate just after 2 a.m. He was calm, focused. but witnesses say that changed the moment he saw his brother in the back of a police car. He yelled, lunged toward the vehicle. "You did this. You killed them." Nick didn't respond. He just smiled. But was that a smile or a warning? The media ran with that image. Nick Reiner smirks after arrest. Cold-blooded son shows no remorse. But those who know Nick say he often smiled under stress. That it wasn't cockiness. It was defense. Was he mocking his brother? Or was he trying to say, "You have no idea what's going on"? Because right now we don't. The facts don't line up. The footage is missing. And one of the only people who might have had answers wouldn't live long enough to give them. Because just days ago, Nick Reiner was found dead in his prison cell. Brutally beaten. Unrecognizable. Silenced forever. But what if he wasn't the only one who knew the truth? What if someone else, someone on the outside, had a secret too dangerous to expose? And what came next would change everything. No one saw it coming. Was Nick Reiner born broken? Or was he slowly pushed there? That question hangs over this story like a fog that won't lift. Because before the handcuffs, before the guest house, before the prison cell where his life would end, Nick Reiner was just a kid growing up inside a Hollywood fairy tale. And like many fairy tales, this one had a dark underside. Let's go back. Way back. Nick Reiner was born into something most people only ever glimpse on red carpets. A famous last name. Doors that open without knocking. Dinner conversations filled with writers, actors, directors. Scripts scattered across the living room like homework. But here's the thing no one likes to admit. Privilege doesn't protect you from pain. Sometimes it magnifies it. Nick was the middle child. Not the oldest. Not the youngest. Always in between. Jake was the dependable one. The quiet achiever. Romy was the spark. The charisma. The one who lit up a room. Nick was complicated. The boy who didn't fit the script. Friends from Nick's childhood describe him the same way, even years later. Brilliant. Sensitive. Volatile. He could spend hours talking about film theory one moment, then disappear for days the next. Teachers said he was gifted but distracted. Coaches said he had talent but no discipline. And at home? Home was intense. Rob Reiner was a loving father, but also demanding, driven, a man used to excellence, deadlines, control. Nick, on the other hand, was emotional, easily wounded, easily overwhelmed. Their arguments started early. Rob pushed structure. Nick resisted it. Rob wanted resilience. Nick wanted understanding. And neither knew how to give the other what they needed. A creative mind turns inward. In his teens, Nick discovered writing. It was his escape, his refuge. He filled notebooks with scenes, characters, dialogues. Stories about broken families. Stories about betrayal. Stories where sons were misunderstood and fathers were distant giants casting long shadows. Sound familiar? Teachers praised his work, said it was raw, honest. But some noticed something unsettling. Nick's characters often ended badly. Alone, trapped, silenced. Was it just fiction? Or was he already writing his own ending? Hollywood isn't kind to the sensitive. By his early 20s, Nick had begun dabbling in Hollywood professionally. Small projects, script coverage, meetings that went nowhere. And here's the cruel truth about Hollywood. It's brutal if you don't have thick skin. Rejection piled up. Even with his last name, Nick struggled to be taken seriously. Some insiders whispered that studios avoided him because of who his father was. Nepotism works both ways. Every failure felt personal. Every rejection confirmed a growing fear in Nick's mind that he would never be enough. And that's when substances entered the picture. The spiral begins. At first, it was casual. Drinks at parties. Pills at after parties. But soon, it became something darker. Friends say Nick used substances not to have fun, but to quiet his thoughts. To slow the racing mind. To numb the constant feeling of being watched, judged, measured against his father's success. Rehab came next. More than once. Each time, the family rallied. Paid for treatment. Issued polite statements. Smoothed things over. But something shifted after the second rehab stint. Nick came back different. Quieter. More suspicious. He began talking about people using him. About being controlled. About secrets that were bigger than all of us. At first, the family dismissed it as paranoia. Later, they weren't so sure. The guest house years. The guest house was supposed to be temporary. A place for Nick to stabilize. To regroup. Rob reportedly told friends. He just needs time. And space. But time and space can be dangerous when someone is unraveling. Nick spent long stretches alone, writing, watching old films, obsessing over certain news stories, keeping odd hours. He stopped answering calls from old friends. He started writing in code. That notebook, found the night of the murders, wasn't his first. There were dozens, some filled with screenplay ideas, others with something else entirely. Lists, diagrams, names circled and crossed out, and one recurring theme: they're lying to us. The Thanksgiving that changed everything. Let's talk about Thanksgiving, because multiple sources say that was the moment things crossed the line. According to a family acquaintance, dinner started normally. Wine, laughter, politics, the usual. Then Rob brought up Nick's future, asked what his plan was. Nick snapped, accused Rob of sabotaging his career, accused Michelle of enabling it, accused Jake and Romy of playing along. Voices were raised, chairs scraped, plates shattered. And then Nick said something that reportedly chilled the room. "You'll regret not listening to me." After that night, Romy distanced herself. Jake tried to intervene, suggested therapy, mediation, anything. Rob, sources say, reached his limit. There were discussions about cutting Nick off financially, about selling the guest house, about boundaries. Nick overheard parts of those conversations, and he didn't take them well. Was Nick becoming dangerous or afraid? This is where the narrative splits. One version says Nick was unstable, volatile, a ticking bomb. Another version says Nick was frightened, paranoid, convinced someone was out to get him. Which one is true? Maybe both. Psychologists will tell you, fear and aggression often look the same from the outside. And Nick had started acting like a man under siege. He installed his own locks, covered windows, slept with lights on. He told a friend, days before the murders, "If something happens, it won't be an accident." An odd thing to say, unless you believe something was coming. The night before the murders. Here's something that didn't get much attention. The night before Rob and Michelle were killed, Nick made 3 phone calls. One to an old friend who didn't answer, one to a number traced to a burner phone, and one to Jake. Jake didn't pick up. That voicemail, it's never been released. But sources say Jake listened to it once, and never again. When asked about it later, he reportedly said, he sounded scared. Not angry. Scared. Does that sound like a man planning murder? Or a man sensing danger? The arrest changed everything. After Nick was arrested, public opinion hardened quickly. The media painted him as the villain. Troubled son. Violent outburst. Family annihilator. Case closed. But those closest to him saw something else. They saw a man retreating into himself. During interrogation, Nick asked repeatedly, "Did you check the guest house cameras?" There were none. He asked about the SUV. Police dismissed it. He asked about DNA. They said it was inconclusive. At one point, Nick reportedly said, "You're missing the point. This wasn't about me." But no one listened. And then came prison. Nick behind bars. Nick's time in custody was short and terrifying. He was isolated, monitored, medicated. Other inmates knew who he was. The son of a famous man, the accused killer of his own parents. That's not a safe reputation to carry. According to leaked reports, Nick asked for protective custody. It was denied. He told a guard, "I'm not safe here. Someone wants me quiet." Days later, he was found unconscious, beaten. No cameras in that hallway. No witnesses willing to talk. Just another incident. Another name crossed off a list. The question that won't go away. So ask yourself, was Nick Reiner a monster? Or was he a broken man caught in something far bigger than himself? Did he kill his parents in a moment of rage? Or did he know something dangerous, that got him killed before he could speak? Because if Nick was silenced, then the real story didn't end with his death. It started there. And the next piece of this puzzle? It doesn't come from Nick at all. It comes from inside the family. From a warning Romy gave police that night, one that would later be buried. And from evidence tied not to Nick, but to money, and power, and motive. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What happens when decades of resentment, fear, and secrets finally explode, and everyone in the family is holding a match? By the time December 14th arrived, the Reiner family wasn't just fragile, it was fracturing. But fractures don't happen overnight. They form in whispers, in glances, in things left unsaid for too long. And in this family, things weren't just unsaid. They were buried. But the tension was growing, swelling. pushing up from under the surface like a volcano that had no choice but to erupt. The world saw red carpets, award shows, sweet interviews. But behind closed doors, there was shouting, threats, silent dinners, slammed doors, emotional standoffs. Because Nick Reiner wasn't the only one unraveling. The entire Reiner family was living inside a pressure cooker. And eventually, it blew. It started with money. But it wasn't about money. Let's be clear. The Reiners were rich. Not just Hollywood rich. Generational wealth. Estate trust funds. Multi-million-dollar investments rich. But even in families like that, maybe especially in families like that, money isn't neutral. Money becomes a mirror. It reflects who has power, who's respected, who's in control. And in the months leading up to the murders, money became a battleground. According to a source close to the family's legal circle, Rob had recently restructured his will. Why? Because he was planning to shift assets away from Nick. And Nick knew it. A cold conversation between father and son. Here's what we know from leaked documents and family insiders. 3 weeks before the murders, Rob and Nick sat down in Rob's office for what was supposed to be a serious conversation. No yelling, no drama, just facts. Rob told Nick he was worried. Worried that Nick's erratic behavior, his relapses, his paranoia, were making him a financial liability. He allegedly said, "You've had chance after chance, Nick. This isn't punishment. It's protection." Nick fired back. "You're protecting yourself, not me. You're cutting me off because you're afraid of what I might say." The room fell silent. Then Rob dropped the bombshell. "You'll always be taken care of, Nick. But you're not going to control this family." And that was the end of it. Or so Rob thought. Because after that meeting, Nick stopped speaking to anyone, except his notebook. The Thanksgiving ultimatum. It all boiled over at Thanksgiving. What should have been a warm family gathering turned into the final warning shot. Sources say the table was set for 10. Turkey, wine, small talk. Then the topic shifted. Romy asked Nick how he was doing. Nick gave a vague answer. Jake pressed him. Rob sighed. And Michelle, always the peacemaker, reached for his hand. That's when Nick stood up. Said he felt like a ghost in his own family. Said he knew the paperwork had been changed. Said he wasn't stupid. And that he knew things. Jake told him to calm down. Rob said, "You're acting like a child." And Nick leaned in and said something that turned the room to ice. "You think I'm dangerous? You haven't seen dangerous yet." Then he walked out. After that night, everything changed. Rob reportedly told Michelle he was done. No more guest house. No more trust fund checks. He contacted the family's attorney the next morning and requested documents to legally evict Nick from the property. But Michelle hesitated. She still believed Nick could be helped. She insisted they wait until after the holidays. "I don't want his last Christmas here to be filled with hate," she allegedly said. A tragically ironic statement, given what would happen just weeks later. But it wasn't just emotional for Michelle. There were other complications. Because Nick wasn't the only one with secrets. Michelle's diary, the private pages no one was supposed to read. Yes, there was a diary. No, it wasn't discovered until after her death. But when it was found, it opened a whole new door. Hidden inside her walk-in closet, behind a false panel in the wall, was a leather-bound journal. Handwritten, pages dated back over 4 years. Entries about motherhood, regret, fear, and more than one page about Nick. One entry, dated just months before the murder, read, "He frightens me sometimes. Not because of what he says, but because I see so much of Rob in him. The anger, the control, and the silence that comes after the storm." That line alone changed everything. Because it wasn't just about Nick's behavior. It was about Rob's too. Rob's shadows. It's hard to say this out loud when someone is passed. Especially someone as beloved as Rob Reiner. But fame and kindness aren't always the same. Friends of the family have hinted, carefully, that Rob could be intense, controlling, short-tempered, emotionally unavailable. The kind of man who demanded perfection. Not only from himself, but from his children. Nick, already fragile, internalized that as rejection. Every script note from his father felt like a slap. Every moment of silence felt like abandonment. And every public appearance where Rob praised Jake or Romy but said nothing of Nick felt like exile. The day the threat was made. According to an anonymous employee on the Reiner estate, Nick once stormed into the main house mid-morning, pale and shaking. He accused Rob of spying on him, of trying to erase him from the family. He said someone had gone through his guest house notebooks. And then he said it. If you're going to erase me, I'll make damn sure I leave a mark before I go. The staffer didn't report it. Not then, but they remembered. And after the murders, they told detectives. Was this just a family falling apart? Or something worse? It's easy to say this was inevitable. A troubled son. A powerful father. Old wounds. New threats. But some investigators believe this wasn't just a domestic explosion. They believe something else was happening. Because as much as Nick seemed unwell, there were signs of calculation. And others think the entire family dynamic was being manipulated by an outside force. One theory suggests someone in the inner circle may have stoked the conflict to benefit from the fallout. A business partner, a legal advisor, a jealous relative. And when Rob made changes to the will, everything accelerated. A sibling divided. Let's not forget about Jake and Romy. Publicly, they stood together after the murders. But behind the scenes, they reportedly took very different positions on Nick. Jake wanted him institutionalized. Romy believed he needed support, not exile. Jake allegedly pushed Rob to cut Nick off. Romy begged Michelle to delay the eviction. And somewhere in the middle was Nick, watching his family debate his fate. Helpless, furious, alone. That kind of isolation? It does something to the mind. Something dangerous. And then there was a letter. 1 week before the murders, Nick mailed a letter to himself. Yes, to himself. Postmarked. Sealed. Unopened until after his arrest. Inside were 3 words. Watch the cameras. That's it. No context. No date. But it shook investigators. Because when they checked the surveillance system, it had a blind spot. Exactly the time and place the murder occurred. Who knew about the camera system? Nick, obviously. But also Rob, Michelle, and the estate's private security firm. Which brings us to one final question. What if Nick wasn't trying to commit a crime? What if he was trying to catch one in progress? But what came next would expose the one person no one ever suspected and tear the last piece of this family apart. What if the motive wasn't madness, but money? What if everything we thought we knew about this tragedy, the rage, the relapse, the family tension, was just the surface, and beneath it, a war over power, control, legacy, and a $13.5 million estate that everyone knew would eventually pass hands. Because behind the emotional chaos of the Reiner family, there were documents, legal ones that told a very different story. A story of shifting assets, hidden trusts, and one son's growing fear that he was being erased not just from his family, but from their future. A house worth killing for? Let's start with the Brentwood estate. It wasn't just a house. It was the house. The one Rob Reiner purchased in the late 1990s at the height of his career. The one where he raised his children. The one where A-list guests walked barefoot on the imported Italian marble, where charity galas lit up the backyard pool, and where studio execs signed 7-figure deals in the study. Today, it's valued at $13.5 million. That kind of home is more than bricks and prestige. It's leverage. It's inheritance. It's the physical embodiment of you belong to this empire. And Nick? He didn't own a piece of it. He just lived in the guest house. Temporarily. The guest house agreement. Here's where things get tricky. Legally, Nick had no ownership over any part of the Brentwood property. He was never listed on the deed. His name was never on the trust. But, and this is crucial, he did have a signed residency agreement. A quiet internal family document that gave him full-time access to the guest house with no rent in exchange for mental health recovery efforts. In other words, Rob and Michelle let him live there, under the condition that he kept clean, stayed quiet, and didn't cause drama. But in the months leading up to the murders, that agreement was quietly revoked. The will that changed everything. Rob and Michelle's estate planning was handled by a powerhouse Beverly Hills law firm specializing in high-net-worth legacy transitions. Translation: rich families who need airtight control over who gets what. In 2023, the will gave all 3 children, Jake, Romy, and Nick, equal shares of the estate, with special carve-outs for healthcare coverage and trust flexibility. But sometime around June 2025, that changed. A revised will, which investigators obtained after the murders, revealed the following. Jake and Romy were to receive equal 45% shares of the estate. The remaining 10% would be allocated to a charity founded by Michelle. Nick's name was completely removed. No mention, no provision, not even a symbolic dollar. He was written out completely, legally, permanently. How did Nick find out? That's the million-dollar question. Because if he didn't know, then the theory that this was a revenge killing over being disinherited starts to fall apart. But multiple sources close to the family say he knew. In fact, it may have been Michelle herself who told him. According to a house staffer, an argument erupted between mother and son in late November 2025, loud enough to be heard from the garden. Nick's voice was shaking. "You think a signature changes who I am to this family?" Michelle replied, "And this is chilling. You've already made yourself a stranger to us." That was the last time they were seen speaking face to face. Why would they cut him out? There are several possibilities. Option 1, protection. Rob, ever the strategist, may have believed that cutting Nick off would push him toward responsibility. Tough love, the classic rock bottom theory. Option 2, fear. Michelle's journal entries, remember those? Paint a portrait of rising anxiety, of sleepless nights, of a son she no longer recognized. Option 3, secrets. There's a more sinister theory, one whispered by insiders who knew the family well. Some say Rob and Michelle discovered something in Nick's notebooks, something that scared them. Maybe it was delusional, maybe it was true. But whatever it was, it may have prompted them to erase his access, fast, and not just to their home, but to their legacy. The power of being left out. For someone like Nick, fragile, isolated, and already spiraling, being erased from the will wasn't just a financial blow. It was existential. It was proof that he didn't belong, that he had been written out, literally, of the story of his own family. And here's the contradiction that so many miss. Nick didn't want their money. He wanted their acknowledgement. Being cut out confirmed the one fear he never said out loud. That he never really mattered to them at all. But someone benefited. And it wasn't just Jake and Romy. This is where the story turns again. Because the revised will didn't just leave Nick out. It empowered someone else. The family's financial trustee, a longtime associate named Thomas Elwood, was named executor of the charitable donation clause and given expanded power of attorney should Jake and Romy decline the role. Why does that matter? Because Elwood had ties to several real estate developers in Brentwood. And rumor has it, he'd been pressuring Rob to sell the estate before the end of 2025, when a new tax code would go into effect. Selling the house, while alive, meant less capital gains liability. But Rob allegedly refused to sell. Was Elwood frustrated? Was he desperate? Could he, or someone connected to him, have wanted the estate unlocked sooner than expected? An accidental email forwarded to Nick. Here's a detail most people don't know. 3 weeks before the murders, Nick reportedly received an email from Elwood's assistant by mistake. The email contained a financial report, one outlining the projected asset breakdown after liquidation of the Brentwood estate. Nick wasn't supposed to see that, but he did, and he sent a reply that was later recovered from his deleted drafts folder. So that's the plan? Delete me and cash out. The draft was never sent, but it was saved. Alongside it, in the same folder, was a quote pasted from a screenplay Nick had once written. They killed the character off halfway through, but they forgot he still knew how the story ends. What did Nick plan to do? That's the biggest unknown. Did he intend to confront them? Did he intend to expose them? Or was it already too late? Was the betrayal so deep that something inside him snapped? One friend said Nick had mentioned leaving LA for good, that he was looking at cabins in Oregon. Another said he was planning to release a family truth project online, something involving audio recordings and his notebooks. But none of that ever happened, because 2 weeks after receiving that email, Rob and Michelle were dead. The estate today, frozen, sealed, investigated. As of this writing, the estate remains under probate lockdown. Investigators are reviewing transactions, legal communications, even internal firm emails from the Reiner's attorneys. And you know what they found? An anomaly. 1 week before the murders, someone accessed the estate planning database and downloaded all revisions to the will from an external IP. Not Rob, not Michelle, not Jake, not Romy, not Nick. Someone else. Someone with login access. And that person's name has not been released. But if what sources claim is true, that person was in the house just days before the murders and left without anyone noticing. So ask yourself, Was this about a son snapping? Or was he the scapegoat for something far more methodical? Was Nick Reiner dangerous? Or was he about to reveal a dangerous truth? Because here's the twist. The person who may have orchestrated the entire financial scheme, who may have pulled strings behind the scenes, isn't dead. And according to Romy's own words, they're still out there. And they may have struck again. What happened next would drag Romy into the darkest chapter of the entire case. And what she found would change the investigation forever. What if the most important evidence wasn't the bodies, the will, or even the blood-soaked study, but a single phone call? A call so raw, so chaotic, so utterly unfiltered, it stripped away every illusion of Hollywood perfection and laid bare the reality of a family in collapse. That call was made by Romy Reiner. And once you hear what she said, and what she didn't, you'll understand why investigators are still asking, did Romy just report a murder? Or did she accidentally reveal something more? 10:42 p.m. 911. What's your emergency? The dispatcher's voice was calm, robotic. But Romy? Romy sounded like she was running from something invisible. Her breath came in gasps. The phone rustled against fabric. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. Then, 7 chilling words spilled through the receiver. Please, I think he's still here. Right there, the first twist. She didn't say someone's been hurt. She didn't say there's blood. She jumped straight to fear, straight to suspicion. He's still here. And she didn't hesitate to name him. I think it was Nick. A call unlike any other. Let's break this down. This wasn't a calm, factual emergency report. This was the emotional collapse of a daughter. A daughter who had just stumbled onto the unimaginable. According to the full 911 transcript, which was leaked days after Nick's death, Romy stayed on the line for 12 minutes and 38 seconds. And across that recording, she said 4 things that still haunt detectives. I knew something like this would happen. Not, I can't believe this happened. But I knew. What did she mean? Was it just fear? Or had she seen signs no one else had? They didn't want to listen to me. Who's they? Her parents? The police? Someone else? The knife? I think it came from the guest house. That specific claim was never confirmed publicly, but it raises one obvious question. How would she know that? Had she seen the knife before? There was someone else in the house. I heard them. This is the line that cracked everything open. Because until that moment, the narrative was simple. Nick, parents, blood, done. But now, Romy was saying the quiet part out loud. Someone else was there. The voice of a woman torn in two. If you've ever listened to the audio, and yes, it has leaked, you'll notice something eerie. Romy's voice changes. She starts as a panicked child, but midway through the call, she becomes calm, focused, almost calculated. It's like she realizes she's not just reporting a crime. She's witnessing history. And possibly covering something up. He's not the only one you should be looking at. That line appears at timestamp 10:04 in the transcript. The dispatcher asks Romy if anyone else is in danger. Her response? Nick's not the only one you should be looking at. No further explanation. Just that one sentence. Delivered flatly, followed by silence. And that silence? That's where the case fractures. Because Romy knew more than she said. And it wouldn't take long before others started asking. Who was she protecting? The body language police noticed. When officers arrived minutes later, Romy was found crouched behind a decorative pillar outside the east patio entrance. She was trembling. Her hands were stained with something. Possibly blood, possibly wine. That detail was never clarified. But what struck officers most? She wasn't looking at the house. She was staring at the guest house. Frozen. When they asked if anyone was inside, she shook her head, then paused, and said, I don't know. But just minutes earlier, she told 911 that he was still there. Contradiction? Panic? Or something else? What Romy did right after the call. This is where it gets stranger. Before the police arrived, during the 12-minute 911 call, Romy reportedly walked back into the house briefly, took a photo with her phone, closed the front door, wiped her hands on a kitchen towel. All of this was later pieced together from surveillance footage, what little of it remained. Timestamps and witness statements. Why would she take a photo? Was it to document something? Or threaten someone? To this day, that photo has never surfaced. But a tech leak from the LAPD suggests it may show a detail in the room that contradicts the official narrative. And if that's true, Romy may be holding the most explosive evidence in the case. the family's unspoken tensions come to light. It's important to remember, Romy wasn't just a bystander. She was deeply involved in the family's internal battle. She was the last sibling to defend Nick publicly, but privately, she had grown distant. Texts between Romy and Michelle, retrieved by investigators, show a daughter torn between loyalty and fear. One message, sent days before the murders, read, "I don't think I can keep pretending like everything is fine." Another, "I'm scared of what happens if he feels like he's lost everything." That text could have referred to Nick, but he could have meant someone else too. Jake, Rob, even a third party? Nothing was clear anymore, especially after what Romy did next. The interview that never aired. What most people don't know is that Romy sat for an interview 2 days after the murders. It was arranged privately. No cameras, just audio. An off-the-record, emotional debrief with a journalist she trusted. That recording has never been aired. But according to a source who heard it, Romy said this: "What happened wasn't just about Nick. It was about all of us. And we all saw it coming." Then she broke down crying. "We all saw it coming, and no one stopped it." That doesn't sound like a shocked daughter. It sounds like someone carrying guilt, and maybe even a secret. The redacted police report. Weeks later, the official police report was released to the public. But one section, a full paragraph from Officer T.S.'s body cam notes, was redacted. Why? Because it contained unverified witness statements deemed not relevant to the immediate cause of death. But behind closed doors, that paragraph was about Romy and her description of hearing a second voice inside the house. A male voice, not Nick's, deeper, angrier, saying something she couldn't repeat. That's what she told police. But on the official record, it was gone, buried, erased, just like so much of this story. And then, the deleted texts. Forensic teams recovered deleted messages from Romy's phone. Most were routine, but one stood out. A conversation between Romy and a contact simply labeled T. Date, December 12th, 2 days before the murders. "Romy, I'm telling you, it's not right. He's spiraling. T. He won't do anything stupid. He's all bark. Romy, you don't know him like I do. I've seen what happens when he feels cornered. Investigators believe he is Nick. But who's T? No name. No number linked to a verified contact. Could it be Tom Elwood? A friend? A bodyguard? That question remains unanswered. But what's clear is this. Romy saw it coming. She felt it building. And when it finally exploded, she was the one left to pick up the phone and whisper into the darkness. "Please, I think he's still here." But the real terror? Maybe he wasn't. And maybe someone else was. What came next would drag Romy back into the investigation. This time, not as a witness, but as a suspect. What if the killer left behind a confession, but no one could understand it? Not because it wasn't detailed, not because it wasn't honest, but because it was hidden in plain sight. In this chapter, we're opening the door to Nick Reiner's mind, and we're walking straight into the diary that may hold the truth or a descent into madness. Depending on who you ask, it's either the smoking gun or the final, heartbreaking clue that Nick was never okay. But here's the thing. Some of the entries, they weren't just rambling thoughts. They were warnings, predictions, and one entry in particular, written just hours before the murders, may have revealed a name no one expected. The discovery, December 15th, 2025, the morning after the murders. While forensic teams processed the Brentwood crime scene, a secondary unit was dispatched to the guest house, Nick's space. Small, detached, quiet, his sanctuary. What they found wasn't just a room. It was a world. Stacked notebooks, dozens of them. Spiral-bound, leather-bound, even composition books duct-taped together. Inside, a torrent of thoughts, sketches, coded language, screenplay fragments, arguments with himself, drawings, timelines, angry poetry. But one notebook stood out. It wasn't stacked like the others. It was open on the desk, the ink still smudged. And across 2 facing pages was a title, How They Erased Me. The tone was different. Unlike the others, this entry wasn't poetic. It was deliberate, sharp, focused. As if Nick knew, or feared, that these were his last words that would ever be read. Here's what the first line said. "When they read this, I'll be gone. Not dead, maybe, but gone. Because they don't want me talking anymore. Gone. Not dead. Not dead, maybe." Did Nick expect to be arrested? Did he expect to run? Or did he know something else was coming? A mind in freefall, or a man trying to make sense of chaos? Many pages of the diary were deeply disturbing. References to feeling watched, claims of betrayal, questions written repeatedly. Who unlocked the cameras? Why was T there? Why did she lie about the will? Who was T? He never clarified. Some thought it stood for Tom Elwood, the financial advisor. Others speculated Tracy, a former friend, or even they, a generic label for enemies. But one thing's for sure, Nick believed there was a conspiracy against him, and he believed someone inside the family was part of it. A family map, covered in arrows. One eerie spread in the notebook was a sketch, a childlike diagram of the family. Nick in the center, lines drawn outward. To Rob, father, control, pride, surveillance. To Michelle, mother, love, shame, guilt, complicity. To Jake, silence, agreement, transactional. To Romy, compassion, weakness, truth. Underneath, one line was underlined 3 times. They will choose blood over truth. Whatever that meant, it chilled investigators. Was Nick saying the family would cover for each other? Or that someone would be sacrificed to protect the others? And if so, was he the sacrifice? The final entry, a name, a warning, and a twist. The last dated entry was scribbled in a shaky hand. December 14th, the day of the murders. I hear the whispers outside. I know what's coming. I told them. No one listened. The will, the footage, the silence. T knows. Or knew. Now it's too late. T knows. Or knew. Initials. And then the page trails off, except for a final scrawl at the very bottom. Ask Jake. Ask Jake. Jake Reiner, the brother who had stayed quiet for months, the one who showed up at the house after the murders. Why would Nick end his final entry with that? Did he believe Jake knew something? Or was Jake more involved than anyone realized? Investigators react. When the notebook was handed over to authorities, they took it seriously. Initially, they considered it the ramblings of a disturbed man. But after reviewing timelines, forensic inconsistencies, and financial records, they began to reevaluate. Because several things Nick wrote in the diary lined up with facts that hadn't been made public. The security footage blackout from 2:42 to 4:11 p.m.? Nick wrote, they'll say it was a glitch, but it was cut. On purpose. T knows. The black SUV seen briefly on a neighbor's Ring camera? Nick wrote, not my car. Not Jake's. Third party. Quiet wheels. Window tint too dark for legal. The missing files from Michelle's home office? Nick. She kept the paper copy. But I saw the scan before it vanished. If Nick was hallucinating, it was a terrifyingly accurate hallucination. If he wasn't, then someone else was hiding more than just guilt. They were hiding intent. Jake's response to the diary. When Jake was shown excerpts from the diary during a private police interview, sources say he went pale. He denied everything. Said the handwriting looked unstable. Claimed Nick always had a flair for theatrics. But one line reportedly caused him to visibly shake. Ask Jake. He asked to leave the interview early and didn't return follow-up calls for weeks. No official statement was released. And to this day, Jake has never commented publicly on the diary's contents. But Romy did. Romy's confession to a friend. In a private conversation leaked by a former roommate, Romy allegedly said, he wasn't wrong. Not about everything. The friend asked her what that meant. Romy replied, let's just say there's a reason Jake won't talk to anyone. Pause. It's not what Nick thought, but it's not nothing either. If that's true, then Jake isn't just grieving a brother. He's hiding from one. The page that went missing. One more detail. When the notebook was first photographed, it had 87 pages. But by the time it arrived at the police station, only 86 remained. One page had been torn out. Carefully. No fragments left behind. Was it removed by police? A family member? Or had Nick done it himself? And if so, where is that page now? Why this diary still matters? Because it shows motive, fear, frustration. But more importantly, it points outward. For so long, the public was told this was a story of one man's collapse. But what if it wasn't? What if Nick was documenting a larger plot? What if the story doesn't end with a stabbing and a prison death? What if the real crime is still unfolding? Because right now, someone else holds the missing page. Someone else knows what T stands for. Someone else knows what Nick saw that terrified him into writing his final words. And coming up next, We're going to dissect the crime scene autopsy and discover a detail the Reiner family never wanted made public. What if the most disturbing truth about the Reiner murders wasn't how they died, but how they were arranged afterward? In this chapter, we move from speculation to evidence, from whispers to wounds. Because autopsy reports don't lie. They reveal the grim truth beneath headlines and theories. They strip away the performance. And when the Los Angeles County Coroner's Office released the autopsies of Rob and Michelle Reiner, the findings sent shockwaves through everyone involved in the case. Why? Because what they found wasn't just brutality. It was precision, and possibly ritual. Let's open the file. Autopsy report number 0013498. Rob Reiner. Date of death, December 14, 2025. Cause, multiple sharp force injuries. Manner, homicide. The first body discovered by police was Rob Reiner's. He was found in his private study, slumped over his desk. Initial reports suggested he was attacked from behind, but the autopsy told a different story. Rob had 7 stab wounds, 2 in the upper back, 1 in the neck, 4 in the chest, clustered near the heart. But here's what stunned forensic experts. Only one of those wounds was fatal. The other 6? Deep, but not lethal. Which means Rob was alive for several minutes after the initial attack, possibly longer. He may have even tried to write something, as a pen was found in his hand, and faint ink smudges were discovered under his fingertips. But whatever he tried to write, it wasn't recovered. A single torn sheet was found near the trash. No text, just pressure impressions, later enhanced by lab analysis to reveal one chilling word. Why? Blunt force trauma, the hidden clue. Here's what most news outlets missed. In addition to the stab wounds, Rob suffered a blunt force injury to the temple. A single strike, enough to disorient, but not kill. The pattern matched the edge of a crystal paperweight from his desk, found shattered on the floor. This suggests the killer may have struck Rob first, before stabbing him. Which raises a question. Why knock someone out, then stage multiple stabbings? Was it to make it look like something it wasn't? Was it overkill? Or was it symbolic? Autopsy report number 0013499. Michelle Reiner. Date of death, December 14, 2025. Cause, multiple sharp force injuries. Manner, homicide. Michelle's body was discovered in the sitting room. And unlike Rob, she showed signs of a struggle. Defensive wounds on both forearms. A broken thumbnail. Blood spatter on the far wall suggested movement during the attack. But the fatal blow? A single stab wound to the abdomen. Angled downward, from close range. This wasn't random. It was controlled, even surgical. And most disturbing? The autopsy revealed no alcohol or drugs in her system. Michelle was stone-cold sober. Aware. Present. When she died, they were positioned with care. That's the line from the lead forensic investigator's notes. Rob was placed facing forward at his desk. Michelle's body was laid near the fireplace, hands resting beside her. No signs of dragging. No signs of panic. No furniture knocked over. Everything was deliberate, which raised a terrifying possibility. The killer took their time. No rush. No chaos. Just calm brutality. But the question is, why? Why make it look so clean? Unless the killer wanted to send a message. The missing blood. Now here's where it gets weirder. The estimated volume of blood loss from both victims, based on body mass and wound severity, was over 3 liters. Yet only 2 liters of blood were recovered from the scene. Where was the rest? Some suggested it soaked into clothing or carpet, but the math didn't add up. A second theory? The killer cleaned up part of the scene. But why clean part of it? Unless something went wrong. Or unless there was a second location we haven't seen yet. The knife, an impossible weapon? The presumed murder weapon, a chef's knife with a 7-inch blade, was recovered from the kitchen sink. Wiped clean. No fingerprints. DNA was inconclusive. Trace particles on the blade suggested it hadn't been used in food prep recently. But here's the mystery. The depth and angle of Rob's chest wounds indicated the blade entered with a force of over 200 newtons. In layman's terms, a strong, trained hand. Most average people, especially under stress, can't drive a blade that deep. Not without hesitation. Not without practice. Which begged the question, was Nick capable of this kind of attack? Or was someone else holding that knife? Inconsistencies in time of death. The coroner placed both times of death between 3:45 p.m. and 4:10 p.m. But remember, the house's security system went dark from 2:42 to 4:11 p.m. A perfectly aligned blackout. Almost too perfect. And then there's this. Romy's 911 call came in at 10:42 p.m., meaning she discovered the bodies roughly 6 hours after they died. So what was happening in that house during those 6 hours? Was Nick in the guest house the entire time? Did someone return? Or was someone still inside, hiding? One investigator wrote in their notes, "There are no signs of a forced entry, but signs of an inside job. Toxicology, or lack thereof. Both victims tested negative for recreational drugs. But Rob had trace amounts of ketamine in his system, an anesthetic, commonly used in psychiatric treatment, or, in rare cases, for covert sedation. Where would he have gotten it? Or more importantly, who gave it to him? There was no prescription. No mention in his medical files, which leads to